Hey, welcome back to the Homefront Live. My name is Galen. I'm your host today. It's been a while since I did one of these, and if I was going to get back in the saddle, there's nobody I'd rather do it with than the one and only Denver Riggleman. Denver, welcome.
How you doing this morning, buddy?
I am doing fine. All right, so we have a lot to talk about, and a lot of things that you are more than intimately familiar with, probably more than you'd like to be. So let's start with the news of the world and the news of the week. So, uh, we are currently in a missile shooting war with the Islamic Republic of Iran. We have decapitated its government. That has not stopped them from retaliating. So, give us a sense, one, of uh, what you think generally, and two, where is it going to go from here?
Reed, last night I had a complex discussion about this because, what a lot of people don't know about me, Reed, is in 2006, 2007, around the Counter IED Operations Integration Center. So I was going after roadside bomb makers in Iraq, and a lot of that resupply came from Soleimani and the Quds Force at that point. And between 2005 and 2008, they were deploying something called EFPs, explosively formed penetrators. So there's no love lost for me with the Iranian leadership, right? A difference between the Iranian people. So when Soleimani was killed in 2020, now Khomeini, I will tell you this right now, I have no issues with that. The problem I have is with the incompetence of this administration and why they're actually executing this war at this time. And there is some nuance to that. So my baseline thought is on the past performance of this administration, and they're already saying that Iran tried to meddle in elections. I think we have this weird thing where there's a lot of people who aren't worried at all or aren't somehow devastated that we executed, Khomeini, or we went after the leadership that's killed so many American soldiers and had state-sponsored terrorism and supported Shia militia groups in Iraq. I get all that, right? Even if you're talking about going into Lebanon, we can talk about all that. I think the issue that I have with this war is the fact that it was done without congressional approval, number one. Number two, we don't really know why we executed this war if we already obliterated their nuclear arsenal, but they're already creating excuses to meddle in our elections, which they tried to do in 2020 and 2021. So I am very concerned about the downstream effects of this, not only for our military members, which we already have 4 fatalities and other casualties. I'm also worried about the downstream effects of an incompetent administration with sycophants trying to execute a war without any baseline on why we did this at this time, and then utilizing that for really bad things coming up to the midterms and into 2028. So there's this weird thing being a former Air Force guy who went after Iranians and Iraqis where I despise their leadership, and especially the IRGC, the Quds Force. But the other hand is, why are we prosecuting a war without proper authorization? And that's something I had to deal with in Congress myself when I was a congressman. But why in the hell, right, are we prosecuting a war we're already utilizing or starting to make excuses or coming out with 17 draft executive orders, 17-page draft executive orders to generalize our elections or nationalize our elections and make it much easier to do so? It's just such an awful time, right, for us to be in right now with this.
So there's a lot there. So let's start with the military aspects of this and the strategic aspects of this. So you decapitate a government, and I read a headline somewhere, maybe it was on Twitter, and forgive me for not knowing or remembering who said it, but it was like Donald Trump called around to like 8 different media organizations and gave them each both the reason why he did it and how long it was going to take. It was, oh, we had to do it because of the nuclear stuff. We had to do it because they were an imminent threat. If you were watching, say, CNN and Scott Jennings, who is the most loathsome creature ever, right? He was sort of the cheerleaders of it. For 47 years, they have been doing this. For 47 years, they have been doing this. But to your point, all of those things uh, weren't really in evidence, and it turns out that the Pentagon seems to be making sure that the media knows. Look, we didn't think we had a good reason here, and they said, oh, they're going to reach out and touch our troops in these different bases, which of course they have in the past, and theoretically they could. But it wasn't until we attacked them that they actually did that, and so there's this circular illogic of the whole thing. But then also, of course, what are you going to do now? So, if you watch the footage, obviously, I'm sure everybody has seen it. There's incoming missiles, there's outgoing interceptors. And it's not just in Iran or Israel, but it's also in a lot of places that are considered, I guess, our allies, Denver. And one thing that's come up, and I know this is more of a logistics question than a strategic question, is, you know, you can every time they shoot down a $20,000 drone with a $1 million missile, right? All the Iranians have to do is keep shooting, 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 and eventually they're going to have more cheap drones than the UAE or the Israelis or somebody else is going to have expensive interceptors.
People forget that Russia is actually, they're a massive Shahed supplier, right? I mean, and actually they utilize the Iranian Shahed drone um, plans and things of that nature. Now, Iran's not supplying all the Shahed drones now, right? They have their own supply chain now in Russia. But Iran's pretty good at drone warfare. And by the way, Russia and Iran are learning from the best, the Ukrainians. So, it's interesting that you would say this because that's where Ukraine has done so much damage to Russia is based on their utilization of first person view drones, FPVs, but also like their Baba Yaga drones or vampire drones and their ability to manipulate the airspace. Now, so I just find it interesting, right, that the Pentagon has already pushed back Reed, right, on the administration itself saying, well, how many missiles are you going to use? What's going to happen to our stockpiles, right? They're already diminished. We've been all around the world shooting missiles. What the hell are we going to do here? What's gonna happen in the future? How long is this gonna last? What is our exit plan? It's funny, I've been watching, you got far right pundits, you got under the biddles like that trying to rationalize this when Trump in 2024 said we would never go to war with Iran. He criticized Obama and them, had conspiracy theories about Obama going to war against Iran because of his domestic polling. And he's doing the exact same thing. So I just think the incompetence of this administration, the fact that so much talent has left. I don't think there is a long-term plan. Actually, I know there's not a long-term plan. And just yesterday, Lindsey Graham saying they have no plan, and Ted Cruz said that there was no indications that they have a nuclear program that's on its feet at all. I just find it amazing that they're trying to find the message for the war when the war really is about Bibi Netanyahu and MBS in Saudi Arabia.
Well, and that was one other piece that I can't remember who reported it. Maybe I saw it in the Times. Was it Trump or someone else? Denver said, "Well, the Israelis were going to go, so we decided we had to go with them." And so I posted on Twitter. Well, I guess that makes in a wag the dog scenario. Then I guess that makes Donald Trump the dog.
Well, I mean, it's funny. I did not know we were the combat arm for the Israeli government. And I think, we listen, there could be people that support Israel. You could say, listen, there's nobody who wants to be anti-Semitic. I've been to Israel multiple times, love the people, but you got to start questioning a leadership where you have the same person that's being brought up on corruption charges and continues to prosecute wars, it seems, just to stay out of jail, which seems to be eerily reminiscent of our own president. And I think, people just have to start to open their eyes that we're not prosecuting these wars for the correct reasons. It's very difficult anyway. But when you're looking at a downstream effect and cascading effects of an incompetent administration with people like Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense, right? People like Tulsi Gabbard as the DNI, who really is telling Trump what he needs to hear instead of saying, yes, yes, boss. As soon as we decapitate Khomeini or decapitate their leadership, they're going to capitulate. It's ludicrous. There's 92 million people in Iran. And I can tell you right now, they'll start to mobilize against our threat more than they're going to say, oh, we need to overthrow the regime.
Well, so let's talk about the people of Iran, as you noted, and I think we should say the people of Israel, right? Which is they are not necessarily their leaders any more than you or I would want to be associated with Donald Trump as Americans, if that makes sense. Um, so let's talk about that because you can make an argument. And I think you could say this probably for the Venezuelan people or many people around the world is there were people cheering for Khamenei's death. Okay, makes total sense. That doesn't necessarily mean, they want the old red, white, and blue waving over the streets of Tehran either.
Yeah, I don't, again, it's almost as if we have a megalomaniacal narcissist in charge with people around him who support his habit. I don't know. e- Every time he says he does something successful, it's not. They didn't obliterate Iran's nuclear stockpile, did they? What Reed? What are we doing here? And I look at the Venezuela, the Maduro kidnapping, right, or going after Maduro. Nobody. Nobody cries over Maduro. Venezuela is a failed state. But we left the same exact folks in charge there. And are we the guys now doing regime change around the world? And what does that say about us as America when we announce we're having successful negotiations and we attack? How do other countries feel about us as good faith actors? There's a lot of things you actually have to worry about as a person where the American people is supposed to come first and not your own personal finances or not your own legacy. And I think that's the thing that bothers me is we don't have adults in charge. I can say I'm glad Khomeini's dead and say I'm very worried about the strategic direction of this and why we even did it. Both of those things can be true. A lot of people say, oh, you can't have nuance. You're either for or against. No, you're not, because that's not an adult way of thinking. An adult way of thinking is Iran is our enemy. But why did we employ force when we already supposedly obliterated their nuclear facilities? We were in the middle of negotiations. And now, why are we just going at the behest of Saudi Arabia and Israel? And that's a real question we have to ask as Americans is what the hell are we doing? Why are we making these decisions at this point? What's our end game? And why are we putting American service members' lives at risk at this point? Because you have to root for our service members. I love my country. I'm a former military guy. Reed, you know all this, right? We have to do that. But we can question the reasons for that and while we're putting our men and women in harm's way, while we're hoping for a quick end to this conflict, and literally almost saying, well, we hope Trump, because of his bad decision making, we almost hope he has a victory, right, quickly so we can get our American troops out of harm's way. It puts us in a very, if you're a smart person who's nuanced and above moron IQ, it puts you in a very weird position, right?
I saw somebody in the comments ask this question, and I saw this morning too, Denver. Let me rely on your tactical expertise. How is it the Kuwaitis shot down not one, not two, but three F-15s? And thankfully, it appears that all of the crew are safe,
Thank God.
if shaken up and on the way to the hospital. But how do you shoot down three of your friends' aircraft?
I think there's a few things. I was a mission planning guy. I was an expert at it, right, with multiple airframes from F-15s, F-16s, B-1s, B-52s. That's what I did. I think I'm very good. I know the F-15E well. The issue is there's training issues there. There was probably an issue where the Kuwaitis had training issues and they didn't understand the return to base plan. It's called RTB. I don't understand why they weren't seeing the IFF squawks. I also don't understand how they didn't tell the difference between a Shahed drone and an F-15E radar cross section speed and altitude. It's just it happens. There's the fog of war, but I think it also shows that there's almost this combat ops fatigue. We've been in so many places, we've been mobilized so many times. There gets a point that bad decisions beget bad decisions. Nobody ever knows the cascading effects of war. You try to mitigate as many things as you can. You sometimes hope for the best, but you also plan for the worst. But if you continue to put the United States at this ops tempo, in wartime situations that seem to be fairly chaotic, you're going to have chaotic things happen. Again, it goes back to I would say a strategic decision-making process that's flawed. And again, you have to put two thoughts in. Again, you're absolutely want the F-15Es to succeed, right? The other thing is you absolutely are wondering why we're prosecuting the war the way we are and what training issues were happening with those F-15Es and how that would happen with three of those because and what people understand in IADS integrated air defense systems is they probably prosecuted all three targets simultaneously with a
Mm,
battery. That's what happened. It wasn't probably one after another, but it was probably a three ship coming back in a
okay.
specific altitude block. Yeah, so that three ship was probably engaged with one command and control system. So that's
Oh,
probably what happened. And then the F-15s are like, oh shit, why are we being engaged? Because they were probably already starting to stand down a bit after, returning into Kuwaiti airspace or leaving Kuwaiti airspace. So that's probably what happened, but I'd have to see the whole debrief.
right. So they're descending, they're tired, they're at the end of the mission, and all of a sudden they get lit up, and the next thing you know, you're in the back of some poor guy's Yugo going to the hospital.
Buddy, a THAAD or a Patriot is a badass mama jama for shooting down aircraft, right? And if
Right.
you got to be on your game, and there you go. So, and somebody just said, "What about IFF?" That's what I just said, right? There's squawk patterns. Also, their comms cards are called communication cards back in the day, but their comms weren't aligned. There was a lot of things that went wrong, and somebody's getting a pretty badass debrief right now.
All right. So let's stay over there for one more question, and then we'll bring it back to the U.S. Explain for everybody because I really had to spend a little bit of time looking at a map when the Straits of Hormuz are closed. and it's something about what 25% of the world's oil travels through there. Give us a sense of this bottleneck, how the Iranians can and are using it, and what that means for international shipping, the oil markets, and all of those things that can now not only as Americans here at home watching and hoping, that our service members are safe, and now we know that some are going to come home draped in flags, not on a plane or on a boat. Tell us exactly what that means when when they shut the Strait of Hormuz.
When you're talking about global trade, when you're talking about global fuel transit, any type of natural resources, and people are like, well, somebody said we like, well, it's only 20%. I'm like, what? Do you understand? Only 20%. I, I get almost to the point my head starts to explode because it's very difficult to defeat mines in the Strait of Hormuz or a fast boat slamming into a side of a tanker. I don't think people realize this. That's called asymmetric warfare. And we can bomb the hell out of Iran. We can do all kinds of things. We are a very strong military. But if boats can't get through the strait through the bottleneck and they have to go through mines, you also have other downstream effects. And Reed, I know you're going to laugh at this or you're going to say, what? But you know what a downstream effect is? I hope somebody read the Financial Times yesterday. Insurers are stopping to insure the ships and
Right.
boats, right, transversing right through the Straits of Hormuz, which means large companies are like, wait a second. What are you telling me that if a fast boat rams into our ship, you're not going to pay for it? Like, yeah, you know what's going on there. Don't go there. We're not going to insure you. Holy hell, that'll make somebody now you got a real issue. Now you
Right.
got an issue. And so I don't again, you have to have mission planners and strategic planners that look at those downstream effects. And again, when somebody told me like, well, it's only 20 or 25% of global business, I'm like, okay, you need to just leave me alone for a second. Just
Right.
I don't even have time to go into what that actually means downstream. I don't think you realize what that means if this goes on for longer than 2 or 3 weeks.
Right. And we've already seen a couple of Iran attack a couple of tankers. And as you noted, I think it was Lloyd's of London, famously Lloyd's of London said, we're not insuring any of this stuff. So of course the
No.
shippers are just going to stay, I guess, north of the bottleneck, and if they're not there, they're just going to turn around and go home or wait. Because yeah, you're going to risk $100 million vessel, right? When you know
I
better.
I I again, it's just mind-boggling to me, so I hope that there's smarter people now looking at an exit plan or identifying how far we wanna go in Iran because I don't see American putting troops on the ground with 92 million people in the mountainous terrain of Iran. This is not Venezuela, guys.
No. So let's bring it home and let's do the politics, and then let's do Trump himself. So it's interesting to see that there's a clip that's been pushed around a lot now of Eric Prince himself, the Prince of Darkness, the Prince of Mercenaries, very upset about all this. Bannon was not okay with it. You even saw that the late Charlie Kirk. There's now video resurfacing of him saying we should not do this. Thomas Massey, who was key to getting the Epstein files released as part of a legislative deal, and Ro Khanna, his partner in this, tried to bring a war powers resolution to the floor. It was blocked before the military action started. So give us a sense of where you think this is politically between Republicans and Democrats. I mean, Trump was supposed to be the guy who ended forever wars. He was supposed to be the guy who did not want to play as the world's policeman, who repeatedly, and now, of course, there's always a tweet, Denver. How many different times did he say that, as soon as Barack Obama got in trouble politically, he was going to attack Iran?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a great Republican actually text me this morning. He goes, "I didn't know we had brought back the entire neocon structure to the Republican Party." I
I
started
know even
laughing.
John Bolton thinks isn't a good idea. What does that tell you?
I tell you what, when John Bolton does it, that doesn't mean he got his wartime Viagra. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
right.
here's the thing. I think there's three domestic issues that really underpin all this. I think the first domestic issue is this 17-page proposed executive draft order for nationalizing elections based on foreign interference, which you heard Trump come up talk about Iran interfering in elections now in 20 and 24. This draft EO, 17 pages, I read it. If I read parts of it, people would be shocked and horrified. They even have a draft number for it, 14248. I'm reading it right here, guys. I have it. It looks like the December 20th draft EO written by Sidney Powell after they thought EO 13848 wasn't good enough to steal elections with. So it's pretty interesting to read this. So I think the first thing is this does give, and the downstream effect is it does give Trump, he thinks, through disinformation and propaganda, maybe an ability to manipulate the 2026 and even downstream the 2020 elections. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is polling. I think when you see it, the economics, healthcare, the things that are happening in red districts, I think he needs a win. I think he looks at this as part of his legacy of Venezuela, right, of Iran, and then as Cuba is him actually somehow being the unifier, right, of these countries away from their evil regimes, which is sort of this weird headspace he's in based on people feeding him crap. I think the third thing, last but not least, and I know people, I don't know if they'll agree with me, is the Epstein files.
Mhm.
I think that really has been absolutely devastating, especially with the latest, with parts of his activities being redacted or kept from public view, and they seem to be horrific. So I think these are the things that he's dealing with. I think it's the internal issues that really pushed him into Iraq, and his personal finances is, I would say, three Bravo, right underneath, like a sub layer, is his personal relationships with Saudi and Bibi, and what business relationships or arrangements that he has that are downstream from this also. So I think all that sort of plays into this, which again, we have to root for US. I will always. I'm a military member. Iran killed so many of my feather brothers and sisters in Iraq. Their Shia militia groups have done untold harm. The IRGC and Quds Force, I wish we could lay waste and obliterate them. But if we make decisions outside of proper strategic decision making, bad things happen. And if we're making those decisions based on domestic awfulness, bad things happen. And I think that's the real, again, the things that you got to hold in your head and try to sort of navigate as we go downstream from this. I just don't know any other way to put it, Reed.
So Denver, let's take us through this executive order a little bit. What exactly are they saying? Are they now blaming Iran? Or what do they? I mean, because I mean, remember one of the unique things about the United States is that, and this is in the Constitution. I know we just sort of ignore it for a lot of things. Is that states are responsible for the conducting of elections. And so, that goes to secretaries of state or, lieutenant governors, whoever the chief elections officer is at the state level. Then there are county registrars all the way down to your friends and neighbors who are working at polling places. So, how exactly does the Trump administration plan to justify something like this? And secondly, how would they do it?
Well, I don't want to scare people. Back in so and I don't chapters 10 and 11, my breach, I put out for free. The Byrne identity about Patrick Byrne, which transitions into executive disorder, and how they were writing multiple executive orders to overturn the election, which all went back to Pence, right? I don't think people realize the number of plans that were happening simultaneously to get Pence to object to the electors. And they didn't really think they would get that far. They thought they would stop that well before, right, with the January 6th insurrection.
Right.
So there's a lot to unpack. So what I ask people to do, just go get those chapters for free, 10 and 11 on my Substack, download it into Adobe Acrobat, use AI Assistant. You can query it any way you want to. Okay, easy, it's free. Go do it. I don't give a rat's. Have fun with it. Okay, because it's exactly what this EO is. So let me break it down for you. What they want to do is they want to build an executive order to do multiple things. Number one, give them a reason to suspend elections or take away certain ways of voting. Number two, go after voting machines. Number three, start prosecutions of people who believe meddled in the elections using foreign interference as the rationale. Let me read something to you. When you talk about conspiracy theories, when you're talking about January 6th as a stolen election, which is one of the most ridiculous conspiracy theories, but tens of millions believe it. I'm going to read a sentence. I just want people to just to suck this in, okay?
Sure.
After writing about what happened in 2020 and then using former President Biden as a rationale, here's what they say. There is now clear and compelling evidence from court cases and forensic analysis that these threats, being foreign interference and the 2020 election, the stolen 2020 election, have not been mitigated, but instead have intensified. What they're saying now is this is much worse than the Chinese, Italian satellites, German server farms, broken algorithms in Venezuela. This is much worse than
Right.
2020 and 21. It's actually intensified. And here's how they're going. Here's a sentence that should just chill you, Reed. At the end of the paragraph, they said this constitutes an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States. Back in 2020, 2021, there was a draft national security presidential memorandum called NSPM 13, which suggested that NSA raw data and NSA and our intelligence community should take over the elections. Think about what I'm telling you, Reed. Simultaneously, the guy who was leading the cyber investigations for the administration texted Mark Meadows and said that we should task national assets to go after these bad foreign actors and those in the United States. That's what they're talking about. That's why I wanted to release the chapters, because this looks like the exact same playbook. Because as you know, past performance is indicative of future performance.
Right.
So that's why I released it. I've been warning about this for years, Reed. Thank you for at the beginning saying that. It really sort of fallen on deaf ears, even with 60 Minutes, with all that I did. I think people just forgot. I mean, I got to a point I didn't think people gave a shit. Now here we are, and it's exactly as predicted by not just me, Reed. It was you too. It was so many
Right.
people predicted this. I'm not going to take there's no way. But my book is the only one about it that outlines the plan from soup to nuts, which is pretty interesting.
So let me, if I can put my old campaign guy hat on. So if you're watching it, and if you didn't watch the State of the Union, I can't blame you. And it's an hour and 50 minutes of my life I won't get back. But when he started talking about the insecurity of mail-in balloting, there were dozens, maybe hundreds of Republican campaign guys who were just groaning because it was the Republican Party that perfected mail-in balloting and perfected permanent absentee voting such that it became much more efficient. Make sure everybody is registered to vote. Make sure that they get that early ballot. Make sure that they turn that ballot in. When I take Denver off my list, when I take Reed off my list, I no longer have to target them. Now I know I have 2 votes in the bank and I'm that much more efficient, right? You go back to remember in 2020 in Pennsylvania, his entire political team up there, who were very, very good at what they did, had predicated victory on how many early ballots they could get turned in. Then he went and squashed it all and said they're not trustworthy, they're not trustworthy. And what do we have? Right, we had the red mirage. Right, they had early leads in day of voting, and then all of the Democrats and independents and people who voted for Trump because it was COVID. Right, came in and swamped Trump in the later hours as the ballots were being counted. And so this is one of those things where it's never made any sense. The state I live in, Denver, Utah, is an all mail-in state, right? I mean, talk about when's the last time anybody accused the state of Utah of being, liberal or progressive, right? Like
I
it's the most
I haven't
conservative
heard that,
state in the
Reed.
country. Right. I haven't heard that either. So it's just one of those things where just politically speaking, none of it makes sense. And then you see all these people. Oh well, you have to show an ID to buy beer and all these other things. Shouldn't you show an ID to vote? I mean, I think there's something like 400 cases of illegal voting total since like 1980 or something, right? I mean, that's like it does not happen because that's just not something they just don't do it, right? Hell, I mean, Denver, we can't get half the country to show up in the first place. You think somebody wants to? You think somebody can organize enough people to sway an election, right? And so the whole thing is just ridiculousness. And now what we see is they're utilizing everything. And you keep saying national security. I want to ask you about this. In the fight between Pete Hegseth and Anthropic, the big AI company, Anthropic had a red line, which was we're not going to allow you to use our technology to collect mass bulk data on Americans. Why does the Pentagon, to your earlier point, need to do that?
You know, one of the scariest things, by the way, as soon as that happened, Reed, I have an AI automation company on multiple fronts, and I called to make sure that we continue to use Anthropic in our tech stacks. That was the first thing I said. We will not ever not use Anthropic in our tech stacks, based on their moral decision. The second thing is I believe that they're starting to have some issues. I think you have people like Elon Musk. You have, okay, I'm going to get listen, this is speculative. I want to tell people right now, I don't have sourcing for this. All the other stuff, literally have sourcing for everything we've talked about. No sourcing for this, but I know how contracting works because I've had defense contracting companies read. So I hope everybody's ready to pay attention to this. I would suspect that CEOs of other AI companies were not happy that Anthropic had that business. So my guess is there were backdoor meetings to force Anthropic into a decision-making process that they thought that they would turn down. This is a huge boon for OpenAI and Grok. This is massive because now what the US government can do is they can go away from a competitive process and say, hey, we have to sole source for mission specific emergencies, which you can do. So my wonder is how big are the follow-on contracts going to be for Grok, OpenAI, or even, Google Gemini? My guess is it's not Google Gemini. They're doing other things. My guess is it's Grok and OpenAI. And now they have this inside track to take most of that business. The problem is unraveling Anthropic from all those processes. This could be really crazy. Okay, break. Second part. Why in the hell are we demanding humans completely out of the loop on all of this? And by the way, I own the Hoodle trademark, humans out of the loop. So, right. So that's what I'm saying is why are when you're talking about targeting processes and every time a targeting process, or you talk about Title 50 ops or Title 10 ops, I can go into all that, right? When you're talking about intelligence gathering or operational execution of mission, warheads on foreheads or cyber attack, right? You always have to have a human in the loop. I think what happened with the CEO of Anthropic, he goes, wait a second, AI is great. We trust our own process and our automation layers. But when you're actually talking about pickling a weapon, whether it's kinetic or non-kinetic, right? Whether it whistles through the air and takes blood or whether it's a digital attack, we have to have humans making those final decisions, or we have to make sure that some of that data is actually validated because there's still hallucination issues sometimes or other issues in the data. And there is. I know that for a fact. You wouldn't believe the work we have to do to put safeguards around these automation layers. So I think really what it comes down to is number one, I think it was a backdoor deal to give preferential treatment to friends of Trump, bigger friends of Trump. The second thing is I think it's a misunderstanding or a misapplication of wartime TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. And I believe that you have morons that are actually making these rules or changing them. So I think it's both sides of that. I hope that's. I'm sorry that took a bit, but I wanted to explain it.
No, no, and to add on to that, I interviewed a couple of guys, one from 404 Media, that the Department of Homeland Security is already using mass facial recognition software to be able to look at people right there. They're going to utilize, like when I went to the airport last night, right? Like I stand there and get my picture taken. Those photos are supposed to be deleted. They're not going to be deleted now, right? So there's a lot of this stuff that's already ongoing where we are becoming a big brother state. I mean, look, we've already been a surveillance capitalist country, right? Like they know where we are, they know what we're talking about. You and I, let's just say something like, we love hamburgers, Denver, right? Like in about 15 minutes, we're both going to get ads on our phone for hamburgers, right? Like we know how this stuff works. So that's very
That
concerning
doesn't work
because
for me, Reed. I already get ads for hamburgers. You know what I'm saying, buddy? I don't know.
well,
I
you
don't
get the
know.
doubles. You
I
get the
can't
double
correlate
double.
that
Yeah,
one.
that's
Yeah.
right. Right. Exactly. Yes. Yes.
I can't correlate that. I
That
think
the Happy Meal.
exactly. You're exactly right. I think when you're talking about there's a couple things here. I'm so sorry, Reed. I love this stuff. When you're talking about biometrics, right, or you're talking about facial recognition, I find it interesting that the very party that pushed satanic panic and Mark of the Beast conspiracy theories are the one behind, digital tracking and public surveillance.
It's
Just
10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are?
yeah, yeah, right? Or the people that thought that razor blades were put in frickin' Reese's Pieces or whatever the
Right.
hell, right? So, and you have the same people today, right, who talk about, they're like, my God, I can't believe we're gonna microchip people. That's the mark of the beast, or, things like that. And now all of a sudden, but hey, it's okay, right, that we have complete facial recognition and identification with actually no human interface with AI doing all of it itself. Oh, that's great, right? I'm like, Jesus. The cognitive dissonance, right, of the far right now is so freaking insane. It's hard for me to even get my arms around it, right? I can't even have a sensible discussion with somebody. Wait a minute, Wait a minute. So you're against social security numbers, but you're okay with ubiquitous facial recognition. What?
Right.
What?
I
What?
know.
It's
Well,
are
Social
you
Security
insane?
numbers go back to FDR and his communist cabal of the 1930s.
Oh, this well, that was the first mark of the beast, right? Was the Social Security number. So, so again, it's just incredible to me the cognitive dissonance that's going on right now. And but also, listen, there's a lot of money in this. As you said,
Yep.
data is gold. Facial recognition and biometrics are fantastic, for that kind of monetization of people's identities, but also of people's preferences. And I think what you're saying is just again, how much are we willing to accept, right, going forward with the data mining of our own personalities, identities, and preferences.
Yeah, and I want to ask you one more question before I let you go. So Sam Altman was asked a question about how much power and water and all the other things it takes to train AI, LLMs and all the other things. And he said, well, it takes 20 plus years to train a human, and think of all the food and water and everything else. And I just thought, back to the Matrix, right? When Lawrence Fishburne says to turn us all into this, and it's a copper top, it's a Duracell battery. So like, sometimes, I mean, so are we the Matrix, Denver, or are we Skynet in Terminator? Like, which are we both? Like, is the Matrix going to meet Skynet and they're going to have all sorts of little bot babies?
Well, that's a great question, Reed. Um, when Sam Altman said that, I started, you laugh in horror when you're comparing training AI to a human being, somebody, a cognizant, sentient being that might have families, friends, right? Parents, loves, life. And, I'm thinking, really, how old is Sam? In his 30s, maybe? You
Yes.
know? Yeah. Listen, Sam's just a young, dumb kid that's running a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I mean, there's no adults in charge. And I think you're saying that full circle, what's going on in Iran. We can call something evil, we can call something an enemy, and still have other ways of getting to a mission end or directive without utilizing ego and sort of bad decision making to put people in harm's way. And I think with Sam Altman, what he said about that, I think people need to start realizing somewhere deep that just because somebody might be, brilliant in a way that's say that's engineering, right, or technologically smart, doesn't mean they have one damn clue about what's really happening in the grand scheme of things. Just because you're
Right.
smart in one thing doesn't mean you're smart in all things. And my God, I definitely prove that rule, right? So, but
Yeah.
I think right, and I try not to be, but for him to say that, it really goes down to I think a massive character flaw in the inability to, and a person who's never grown up and is living in this weird world, almost this always digital world that he's never actually had a challenge. And I think as a human being, because of the ease of how he got there, just based on bullshit in Silicon Valley. So I think that's another thing we have to look at. Sam Altman's just a kid, and with a lot of power and a lot of money, and I think that should scare the hell out of people.
Well, it scares the hell out of me. All right. Last question. I want to hop back to election security. So, if you could, aside from having them read your book, if you could tell the governors of Democratic states or purple states, or this attorneys general or secretaries of state of Democratic states, swing states, what would you tell them to be doing right now, both individually and collectively, to ensure that they are putting things in place that do not allow the feds to, co-opt state and local elections?
Within their state, they have to manifest overwhelming legal and political force. There could be no capitulation. This is federalism. This is constitutional. A lot of people say, well, you're going against the Constitution. Well, people need to, there's a caveat in the Constitution where the federal government can interfere with state elections based on certain preconditions, which is what they're trying to do through proposed draft executive orders and things of that nature. The governors of every state, and what will be interesting to look at Republican governors who believe in, that 10th Amendment and all that shit, right, Reed?
Mhm.
And,
I know.
what they,
Jeez.
so, right, all that good stuff that they used to talk about, states' rights. What a Republican governor's gonna do, they're gonna probably capitulate, right, to Trump. but it is about the states standing up on a level they've never had to stand up before because this is existential now. Now you're talking about if this actually would come downstream, and I'm telling people this is a course of action, right? Reed, I'm not telling people this is 100%. It could be that they're just putting out this crap on the draft executive orders and stopping the elections or fixing the elections because they're just trying to scare people and disenfranchise them. Because right now Republicans have to win through subtraction, not addition.
Right.
That's just the truth of it. So, but I think that the governors have to stand up on a level and say, listen, there is no way this is going to happen. It has to be overwhelming force. They cannot capitulate or give in to one iota, and that includes giving up voter rolls. Looking at Nebraska do it in states like that, I'm just shaking my head like, for Republicans who say they're conservatives and value states' rights, right, and still, a lot of them hold on to the lost cause conspiracy of the Civil War, right,
Hmm.
and here they are giving it up, right. It's just incredible to me that that's what we're seeing. But I think governors have to hold the line at a level we've never seen them, and it takes courage. But it also takes, the ability to make sure that you also have overwhelming political force with the messaging that's going into your states.
Yeah, and understand, and this is one thing I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. Is if you are a Democratic leader and you say you worry about this, what's going to happen in the 2026 elections, the 2028 elections, and then you just go on as if like it was something you felt like you needed to check when you see, like I had a list of things I had to say, and this is one of them. I'm really concerned, right? I'm very concerned. I'm going to write a letter, Denver. But then you don't do anything about it. Like that's the question I've had for many of our Democratic friends. It's like it's either existential or it's not, and if it is, start acting accordingly.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like this election determines our life. Well, I don't have time to vote. I'm going to the Baskin Robbins read. I know you told me that the other day. Like, is it this or is it this? You can't say it's
Yeah,
this and then act like it's not. It's not your actions aren't matching your words. And I think that's the other thing too is listen, and I almost said something crude. I don't want to say this, but I think
it's a
that
family show.
well, it is a family show. I think that there comes a time where Democrats and independents have to say, okay, we need to be as tough. It's not the Marcus of Queensberry rules, right? This is a bar fight,
Right.
and I need to be dragging an axe into the bar fight, right? I can't. It's not here saying, "Hey, can we actually just talk about this?" I think it's not like, okay, they're throat punching me. Maybe it's time to throat punch back. And I think I'm talking about politically, not physically, guys. I'm sure that no, I'm talking about the way that you actually engage in the political arena. But I think I would like to see more of that. But right now, I just don't see the Democrats or independents or even some of the center right having the ability to break through the far right ecosystem right now as far as messaging, and that just means they just got to get tougher.
Well, and listen, guys, that's why, and thank you so many of you for joining today in Denver. Thank you, is guys, it's going to come down to us, right? If we're not going to do it, it ain't going to happen. We have too many people who either don't believe it, don't care, have their own agendas, that come before what's for the good of the people. We're seeing that overseas. We're seeing that here at home. We're seeing it in states across the country. When you say, can I not do, is there something I can do? There's always something you can do. I always say, start closest to home, start closest to where you live, where your family lives, where your friends and your community are going to, I promise you need help. Things are going to get tougher as we go here, not better, probably. As much as I want them to get better for everybody, I'm just not that big an optimist, Denver. But you all can do something. You all can be a part of it. Sign up to be an election worker, sign up to be an election observer, do those things, be part of the democracy that we want, not just an observer who said, well, there's nothing I can do, so I'm just going to sit it out. All right, Denver, before we let you go, where can everybody find you and how do they sign up for your Substack?
Well, gonna get crazy. You can just go to Denver Riggleman on Substack. Pretty easy. YouTube is the Breach Media. Pretty neat. Awesome to do. I also want to say this. You're so right, Reed. X, you can go to X. I'm under Denver 4VA. It's my old. I should never got rid of my big account, but I just got sick of it. And then on Blue Sky, Denver Riggleman, you could find me. Listen, that's why I have to run for office again, Reed, because it is about doing. And I thought I could be effective with the writing, with me going to war out here, starting companies again, because I'm really good at companies. I like doing that, as you know. I have AI automation and surveillance. That's so funny. I should say this, but automation layers, right? For video surveillance and things like that. But the other thing that I do is I make whiskey, right? So I have all this stuff that we're doing but I think I have to run again because I probably have lived enough of a life at 55 that I'd be more effective than I was the first time in Congress. And also, is it my duty? I don't know. I've done a lot. I've taken a lot of oaths. I've done a lot of military, a lot of public service. But I think maybe people who hate politics as much as I do maybe should do it. And I'm at a disadvantage because I'm not a narcissist or a sociopath. But I think that, there's an emotional toll and what it takes on your family. But I think people need to do what they got to do when you're in your country. And that's why I have to run again. And I will pick that right time and it will happen.
Well, amen to that, and we'll be 1,000% behind you. As always, gang, you can find me here on the home front. I hope you all will like and subscribe. You can also find me on Twitter, Threads, all of the places. Um, Denver, thank you so much for enlightening us as always.
Buddy, I thank you for having me. I mean, I don't think we can put the message out enough is don't panic, folks, work.
Right.
That's
Don't panic, work. All right, gang, listen, everybody get to work out there, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.
see you, buddy.
Bye bye.
Bye now.